sampling is straightforward. So, ibig sabihin niya is i-reject ng researcher kung hindi siya nag-qualify dun sa dun sa parameters na sinet ng researcher. So, kung hindi sila nag-fit dun sa profile na create dun sa sampling, dun sa sample. So, ayun nga. However, researchers can use various techniques using purposive sampling depending nga. So, di ba sabi ko, pag purposive sampling, nagdi-depend to or gagamit ka nito depende sa goal ng study mo. So, another example nito is, for example, yung gustong malaman ng researcher yung yung advertising effectiveness or sales promotion effectiveness ng isang company. So, pag ganoon, sino yung interviewin niya? So, syempre sila yung yung advertising professionals or marketing professionals or sino yung nasa field na yon. So, ganun siya. Then another next slide. So, strengths and weaknesses of sampling techniques under non-probability sampling. So, for quota sampling, its strengths are simple, easy, and convenient. Then, yung weakness niya is may not be representative of the population since you are only taking a quota from the sample, from the possible respondents. For snowball sampling, so ito naman can estimate rare characteristics since sila nga yung distinct and sila yung hard to reach na population. So using snowball sampling, you can determine those characteristics. Then snowball sampling is time consuming kasi nga what if yung ni-refer ng one subject mo is hindi siya nagre-respond or for instance mali yung email address or phone number na provide sa'yo. So, magko-consume siya ng maraming time pag may mga problem na gano'n. Then, convenience sampling. So, this is the least expensive. So, kasi nga, ito yung ito na yung pinaka commonly used na sampling technique. Siya yung pinakamura. So, least time consuming. Then, this is the most convenient. Then, its weaknesses are selection bias. So, they're sample not representative. So like nga dun sa mall activation, baka yung hinila mo doon or kinuha mong samples, hindi talaga siya yung gusto mong respondent. So yung mga isasagot niya is malayo sila dun sa gusto mong achieve or dun sa mga objectives ng research mo. Then judgment sampling, so low cost and convenient and not time consuming kasi nga you have your research have goals, so then alam mo na kung sino yung mga respondent mo. Then its weaknesses does not allow generalization and subjective siya kasi nga based siya sa judgment ng researcher. So that's it. Do you have questions and clarifications? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we may proceed to our last presenter, I think. So, okay, this time our presenter will be able to discuss the sample size, the sampling error, and steps for calculating sample size. So this time, I don't know if Madam will cover the Crowbox, no? And different strategies you will be able to get the sample size and to find out the sampling error and the steps on how we'll be able to calculate the sizes. So to give us more details about the topic, let us all welcome Madam Charlene Tan. Go ahead, Madam.
Thank you, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be discussing the sample size, sampling error, and steps for calculating sample size. So first, what is sample size? So sample size is a market research term used for defining the number of the individuals included to conduct research. So researchers choose their sample based on demographics such as age, gender, or physical location. So one important thing to consider is how to make sure that we get the correct sample size. How many is enough and why sample size matters. So when we survey a large population of respondents, we're interested on the entire group, but it's not realistically possible to get the answers or results from absolutely everyone. So tulad nung sinabi ni Sir kanina na For example, if the population is the whole Philippines, so it's too impossible to get the response from all the Filipinos. So that's how important sample size is. Kasi we need to get a size that is representative of the whole population. So the size of the sample is very important for getting accurate, statistically significant results and running your study successfully. So if your sample is too small, you may include this disproportionate number of individuals which are outliers and anomalies. So this skew the results and you don't get a fair picture of the whole population. Pero kapag malaki naman yung sample size, the whole study becomes complex at tulad nga ng sabi ni Sir, time-consuming, expensive, and kailangan ng more effort. Although the results will be more accurate compared kapag mas small yung sample size. But here, the benefits won't outweigh the cost. So next slide is an example. For example, you may want to know what people within the 18 to 25 age range think of your product, or you may only require your sample to live in the United States, which gives you a wide range of the population. So the total number of individuals in a particular sample is the sample size. So next slide is the terms used around the sample size. So next slide. So first is the population size. So population size is how many people fit your demographic. For example, you want to get information on doctors residing in North America. So your population size is the total number of doctors in North America. So here in population size, we are talking about how many people ang gusto nating kunin. So to find this out, you need to be clear about who does and doesn't fit into your group. So one example of this is if you want to know about dog owners, you'll include everyone who has at the same point. Syempre, yung meron din silang aso, pero they could answer or could respond to your research. And next is if you're but don't worry, your population size doesn't always have to be that big. Smaller population size can still give you accurate results as long as you know who you're trying to represent. So if you're unable to calculate the exact number, it's all right. It's common to have a known number or an estimated range. So for the confidence level, it tells you how sure you can be that your data is accurate. It is expressed as a percentage and aligned to the confidence interval. For example, if your confidence level is 90%, then your results will most likely be 90% accurate. So in confidence level, in real life, we can have 0% confidence level. So yun yung no faith at all that if you repeated the survey that you would get the same results. At wala ring 100% na confidence level or yung wala kang doubt at all na kahit ulitin mo yung survey, parehas yung result. So no one would love to publish the results from survey when you're not confident of it. While a 100% confidence level does not exist in statistics unless you surveyed the entire population. So yun yung significance ng confidence level. So next terms is the margin of error. When it comes to surveys, there's no way to be 100% accurate. So tulad ng sabi ko kanina, hindi laging tama yung nasa survey natin kasi we're just getting a representative of the whole population and not the whole population. So confidence intervals tells you how far off from the population means you're willing to allow your data to fall. A margin of error describes how close you can reasonably expect a survey result to fall relative to the real population value. So the margin of error, or sometimes called the confidence interval, shows that errors are inevitable. So ang question dito is how much error yung kaya nating i-allow. Then the margin of error is expressed in terms of mean numbers. You can set how much difference you'll allow between the mean number of your sample and the mean number of your population. Then next is the standard deviation. So the standard deviation is the measure of dispersion of a data set from its mean. It measures the absolute variability of a distribution. The higher the dispersion or variability, the greater the standard deviation, and the greater the magnitude of the deviation. So the standard deviation, we have low standard deviation means data are clustered around the mean. Pag high standard deviation naman, it indicates that data are spread out. So a standard deviation close to zero indicates that data points are close to the mean, whereas a high or low standard deviation indicates that data points are respectively either above or below the mean. So now we will discuss the sampling error. So first, what is sampling error? Sampling error occurs when the sample used in the study is not representative of the whole population. So sampling errors often occur, and thus researchers always calculate a margin of error during final results as a statistical practice. The margin of error is the amount of error allowed from its calculation to represent the difference between the sample and the actual population. So a sampling error is an statistical error, and it occurs when an analyst does not select a sample that represents the entire population of data. So as a result, the results found in the sample do not represent the results that would be obtained kung yung whole population ang sinurvey niya. So even if we have randomized samples, we'll have some degree of sampling error because a sample is only an approximation of the population from which it is drawn. And the prevalence of sampling errors can be reduced only by increasing the sample size. So, ano yung steps natin para mabawasan yung errors? So first is, tulad ng sinabi ko, we need to increase the sample size. Kasi a larger sample size results in a more accurate result because the study gets closer to the actual population size. Next is we can divide the population into the groups, test groups according to their size in the population instead of a random sample. For example, if people of a specific demographic make up 20% of the population, then make sure that your study is made up of this variable. Then lastly, know your population. So para hindi na maulit yung sampling error, we should first know our population. Kasi di ba kailangan nating makuha yung representative ng population. So we should understand its demographic mix, know what demographics use your product and service, and ensure you only target the sample that matters. So a sampling error is measurable, and researchers can use it to their advantage to estimate the accuracy of findings and the estimated variance. So next, sampling error and the systematic error. So an error can occur during the sampling process. So a sampling error can include both systematic sampling error and random sampling error. So a systematic sampling error is the fault of the investigation, while random sampling error is not. So ang systematic errors are, since they are systematic, they bias the sample in one direction. Under these circumstances, the sample does not truly represent the population of interest. So in systematic error, the sample is not drawn properly. It can also occur if names are dropped from the sample list because some individuals were difficult or to locate or uncooperative. May mga, for example, nakalagay na sa list natin yung sample size natin at yung mga gusto nating survey, kaso biglang nagbago yung isip ng tao and biglang ayaw niya na mag-cooperate or hindi na natin siya mahanap or hindi na natin siya ma-reach out. So individuals dropped from the sample could be different from those retained. Those remaining could quite possibly produce a biased sample. While on random sampling naman, it is often referred to as a chance error. So it's purely by chance, wherein the samples drawn from the sample population will rarely provide identical estimates of the population parameter of interest. So these estimates will vary from sample to sample. So for example, if we flip a coin, an unbiased coin, so You would not be surprised if you have 55 heads on one trial or 49 on the other or 52 and so forth. So these samples will by chance provide better estimates of the parameter than others. So next, these are the top four market research errors in sampling. So first is the population specification error. So a population specification error occurs when researchers don't know precisely who to survey. So hindi talaga nila alam kung sino yung survey nila. So for example, imagine na research study siya about kids apparel. So sino dapat ang taong isa-survey natin? So 'di ba normally it's the parents or the child kasi kapag bumibili pa yung bata, kapag bumibili it's usually the parents who make the decision. Pero sometimes the kids also influence their parents' decision. So next is the sample frame error. So the sampling frame errors arise when researchers target the subpopulation wrongly while selecting the sample. So it occurs when a sample is selected from the wrong sample data. So for example, there is a national survey conducted by a telephone and the sample frame is taken from the phone book. But not all households, di ba kahit sabihin mo na gusto nila na national survey siya, pero ang naging basis lang nila is yung nasa telephone phone book. Wherein hindi naman natin masabi na lahat ng tao may telephones. So how about those people na walang telephone? So that's a sample frame error. Next is selection error. A selection error occurs when the respondents self-select themselves to participate in the study. So here naman, only the interested ones respond. So you can control selection errors by going the extra step to request responses from the entire sample. So we can have pre-survey planning, follow-ups, and a clean survey design will help the respondents participate in the survey. Lastly is the sampling error. Sampling error occurs due to a disparity in the representativeness of the respondents. So it majorly happens when the researcher does not plan his sample carefully. So these sampling errors can be controlled and eliminated by creating a careful sample design, having large enough sample to reflect the entire population, or using an online sample or survey audiences to collect responses. So for our last topic, steps in computing the sample size. So once you've gathered the information, you can calculate by hand using a formula found in textbooks, or you may use one of many specialized software packages or hand it over to a statistician depending on the complexity of the analysis. But regardless of which way you or your statistician calculates, you need to first do the following 5 steps. So step 1, you need to specify a hypothesis test. So most studies have many hypotheses, but for sample size calculations, choose 1 to 3 main hypotheses. Make them explicit in terms of null and alternative hypotheses. So for example, your hypothesis can be you want to know students who eat breakfast will perform better on a math exam than students who do not eat breakfast, or pwede ding hypothesis na yung kunyari mga motorista who used to have phone calls while driving will be more likely to make errors on their driving course or compared dun sa mga hindi nagsa-cellphone habang nagda-drive. Next is step 2. Specify the significance level of the test. So the significance level, which is also denoted as alpha, is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it's true. For example, a significance level of 0.05 indicates a 5% risk of concluding that a difference exists when there is no actual difference. Step 3, specify the smallest effect size that is of scientific interest. So usually this is the hardest part of na steps sa pag-compute ng sample size. the point here is not to specify the effect size that you expect to find or that others have found, but the smallest effect size of scientific interest. So we need to figure out what is kung ano yung what if it is significant, it doesn't affect anything. So step 4, estimate the values of other parameters necessary to compute the power function. So most statistical tests have the format or of effect or standard error. So we've chosen a value for the effect in step 3. Then standard error is generally the standard deviation. To solve for n, which is the point of all of this, we need a value for standard deviation. There are only 2 ways to get it. First is the best way is to use data from a pilot study to compute a standard deviation. And the next is to use historical data, which is another study that uses the same dependent variables. So sometimes both sources of information can hard to come by. But if you want sample sizes that are even remotely accurate, you need one or the other. Then for step 5, specify the intended power of the test. So yung power of test is the probability of finding significance if the alternative hypothesis is true. So ang usual na power is 0.8, which is the minimum. If it will be difficult to rerun the study or add a few more participants. So a power of 0.9 is better. Pero if you're applying for a grant, a power of 0.9 is always the best. So next is step 6, calculate. So in calculating sample size, that's the formula. But then if you want to make your life easier, then you can use online calculators for that matter. So next slide. For example, let us take the example of a retailer who is interested to know how many of their customers bought an item from them after viewing their website on a certain day. Given that their website has an average 10,000 views per day, determine the sample size of the customers that they have to monitor at a 95% confidence level with a 5% margin of error. If first they are uncertain of the current conversion rate, at yung second is they know from previous surveys that the conversion rate is 5%. So ayan, population size or yung N, given yung kaninang formula is 10,000. So the critical value at 95% confidence level. So yun yung V. And margin of error is 5%. So gumamit lang ako ng online calculator in this sa next slide. So using the details provided. So on the first question kasi with uncertain current conversion rate. So ang lumabas na sample size is 370. So sa next slide naman, for example, if they know from previous surveys that the conversion rate is 5%, so ang lumabas naman na sample size is 73. So input lang natin yung details na meron tayo dyan sa online calculator para mas madali. So that's all for today. And thank you so much for listening to our topic.
Okay, so happen. Okay, so again, what we're going to do, of course, is to a while ago our your president mentioned that the significance level is just 5%. That this will be the advisable one. No, most commonly, no, we're using that one. Okay.